Right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to this cultural session from Anti-Capitalist Resistance. And we're very pleased to have Dodo Modern Poets with us tonight. Three poets whom I know quite well. I've been to a number of their readings in the past in various locations. And the format for this evening is going to be that we're going to hear from each of the poets first. Then I will have a little chat with them, and then we'll throw it open to Q&A from the audience. At the very end of the evening, we will hear about Anti-Capitalist Resistance's conference, which is going to be happening this weekend, and Terry Conway will tell us all about that. So we're very pleased that this great group of poets are here, and their titular organizer, I don't know what your full title is, Patric, poet-in-chief or whatever, but I'm going to kick off with Patric Cunnane. And do you want to say a few words about your latest collection and so on, Patric, before we start?
Well, I just want to say, Joseph, I think the format also includes each of the three poets having a final poem at the end of the evening.
Oh, yes. Sorry, yeah. I forgot about
that. Yes, my latest, I'm going to be reading quite a few poems from my latest collection, The Ghost of Franz Kafka. It's published by Palewell Press, and there is a link to it on the Anti-Capitalist Resistance website in the Dodo Modern Poets block box. So there you are. So anyway, I'm here in Folkestone, and I'm going to start with a poem called This is Folkestone, Calling Ukraine. This is Folkestone, calling Ukraine. We share your anger, we feel your pain. This is Folkestone, calling Ukraine. We will not let you struggle in vain. Invaders built a killing field. Your leaders stand but do not yield. Refugees cross borders of hope, fleeing war's most treacherous slope. The sun will rise again one day. Peace-loving people hope and pray. Homes are opened to welcome you in as history comes round again. This is Folkestone calling Ukraine. What's happening now is pure insane. This is Folkestone calling Ukraine. We share your anger. We feel your pain. My family come from Ireland, and my parents came over here from England, and other members of my family went to America and Australia. So we have a worldwide diaspora. And of course, this story is not peculiar to the Irish. There are similar other nations who've had similar experiences. So this is diaspora. If they spoke Irish, they kept it quiet. Apart from Omadorn, Egypt or Codding, they left their language behind, along with family and farms, bred sons and daughters to continue the chain. New lands offered a cool welcome. They left their language, transported music and lyrics, nurtured history and myths, mastered unfamiliar idioms, prone to the shock of the strange, sailing onwards until morning came, the past becalmed, new earth claimed. This next poem I wrote when I was thinking about the 5 to 6 million Palestinian refugees there are out of about 32.5 million refugees worldwide, and it's called Smoking Gun. They say smoking is bad for you, but imagine you're in a refugee camp and someone hands you a cigarette. What you do? You smoke the fucker greedily, eagerly, because that's all you have between sanity and madness. You smoke the fucker calmly after the first desperate drag, appreciate the friendly fire tickling your lungs. You think, well, it's not as bad as phosphorus gas or losing your sons. What you do if someone hands you a gun and you're in a refugee camp forever, you and 5 million others. You imagine you might pull the trigger and you're no longer in that refugee camp. You're in that place even rich people can't escape. I thought of this next poem when I was eating a delicious Palestinian date. Looks like this, exactly like this one. And this one's called Stone for a Heart. Eating a Palestinian date, wondering how much suffering can one people endure, taking comfort that fruit comes from an orchard not yet occupied. Where's the compassion for people whose life is restricted by checkpoints, walls, greed? Who can blame them for stoning captives whose hearts are stones? I remove the stone from my date, hold it to the light. Nowhere do I see the word hate. I heard a Syrian woman on the radio talking about her life in Homs during the war, and she said that she and her husband had decided to stay there and not leave the city, but to do something really positive. So they opened a bookshop in the premises they found, and they painted it blue, the color of hope. So this is the Blue Bookshop in Homs. Despite the bombs, they insisted life go on. They opened a blue bookshop, ordered stock from Damascus. Customers warmed to the place, memories of childhood tales, novels capturing the imagination, poetry a fuel for love, college days when textbooks were scanned for information. The bookshop lives in peril, life provisional, reading light hard won, a place to smile and cry, feel warm about the world, knowing it holds more than this. One day clouds will lift, explosions and funerals cease. Time to settle with a book, turn to the chapter titled Hope. Just a quick sip of this is water. One of my favorite artists is Ana Mendieta, who's Cuban, and she was born a few years before the revolution. But when the revolution happened, her parents moved her to America, where they thought she would be safer. 20 years later, she returned to Cuba, and it was there she found real inspiration for the art and poetry that sustained her for the rest of her life. So this is Longing for Cuba. Home after 20 years, the artist fills her heart and art with natural materials, carves sculptures into limestone caves in Yuruco National Park, reactivates Taino goddesses, rescues the Black Siboney Venus from an abandoned colonial grave. How the heart longs for homeland, misses the nurture of childhood years, spirited to America at 13 from the flame of revolutionary Cuba into the maw of its bullying neighbor. The artist writes in a poem, "My whole being is filled with want of Cuba. Who can blame her? The teenage hurt of being wrenched from home for the sake of nameless fears." She seizes the moment, returns again and again, loves the crocodile-shaped island, bonds with its artists, reclaims her birthright. She writes in that same poem, "The art of thinking is to see ideas grow from root to fruit. The island embraces her energy. She offers it the fire of her youth." The polar ice caps are melting quite rapidly, and eventually every coastal city on the planet will be flooded as sea level rises by around 70 meters, or something like 230 feet in old money. So this is ice. You're going to make us lonesome when you go, scared and warmer than we want. Penguins, seals, and polar bears go first, left without a rink. Won't be long before your water. We can't splash our way to land as waves sweep everything away and we swim over chimney tops. Breasting shoals of junk, escape from old MacDonald. We can't rattle you in our whiskey. packed peas and pizzas in your embrace. A million distractions kept us sleepwalking through the years, deaf to the sound of you cracking up. Too late now, too late for our tears. Okay, I'm going to finish with this poem. It's dedicated to a young South African poet called Benjamin Maloise. Benjamin was hanged in South Africa in 1985 during the apartheid years for saying the right things at the wrong time. And when Benjamin was executed, his mother said that this tragedy would inspire the struggle to go on. So this is When You Hang a Poet. When you hang a poet, you have not shut his mouth. When you strip his dancing body from the gallows, you have not shut his mouth. When your thieves of the light set his laughing corpse on fire, you have not shut his mouth. When weighted with your guilt, you sink his singing ashes to the ocean floor, you have not shut his mouth. You have opened a door, you have awoken every poet who will in turn awake 1,000 more. Shelley's unacknowledged legislators of the world, for Africa's sake, demand that this be heard. When you hang a poet, you have not shut his mouth. Listen, he is speaking to you now. You have opened a door through which one day freedom will walk. And it did. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for a collection of quite political poems there. And I'd like to ask everyone to give a round of virtual applause at this point.
Real applause.
Even real applause. I'm going to come now to Sue Johns, who's a proud Cornish poet and whom I've seen performing both live and virtually. So over to you, Sue.
Thank you, Joseph. And thank you to my fellow Dodos for inviting me to take part this evening. So I put in the chat a link to my website and also to a group called Poets for the Planet that I belong to, that if you haven't heard of, you may well be interested in. They're also on Facebook and Twitter. And I've got quite a few publications and they're all available on my website. And also on my website, you should find links to my publishers, including Dempsey and Windle. And I'm very glad to see Janice Dempsey from Dempsey and Windle here this evening. Lovely to see you, Janice. Okay, going to do half a dozen poems for you. I'm going to start with one for Ukraine. And this is called Let Sleeping Dolls Lie. The mother is leaving, packing one large bag and a rucksack. How will she carry the little dog, Petro, meaning rock? She will carry him in the rucksack. My little Valentina, meaning strong and brave, is leaving, packing her unicorn suitcase. It must carry food and water. It will carry her dreams. It cannot carry her picture books. It cannot carry her rainbow teddy bear. They must be left behind. Who will carry me, Irina, meaning peace? I cannot be carried. I must be left behind. The father is not packing or leaving. He will carry a rifle. He must be left behind. My little Valentina, meaning strong and brave, is crying. How am I to be left behind? I'm to be left in my cot in the corner, watched over by the rainbow teddy bear. I cannot sit or my eyes will open. I must not see the smoke or the windows broken. I, Irina, meaning peace, will sleep and wait. The little dog Petro, meaning rock, is leaving. He has been packed He will not bark until they bring him back in the rucksack. Thank you. This is a picture from the Guardian newspaper, and the girl in that picture is 14-year-old Wessel Sheikh Khalil, who was one of 60 Palestinians killed in 2018 on the border with Gaza. And then the name Wessel actually translates as reunion, and this poem is for her. Wessel Sheikh Khalil. Something was done and she ran from her home. She was glad she had gone, but she wouldn't return. It wasn't a game, and there's always a war between knowing her name and why she was there. With a pocket of stones and her bottles of water and anything sharp to cut through the wire, her tale is the tale of a small strip of land. If we lived in that land, then would we understand the anger of children who die for a cause? Her name was reunion. She would not recoil from a border on fire, which she was aflame. Once I looked at her smile, I was never the same. Her head took the bullet that came from a sniper whose target was just a young girl. Her home was one room for 6 children and mother. Each Friday she'd gone to the fence with her brother. Something was done and she ran from her home. She was glad she had gone, but she wouldn't return. It wasn't a game, and it's always a war between knowing her name and why she was there. Her family begged, do not go on this day. She was 14 years old. She was 7 decades. She said she must go on the Yom Nakba and would be on the march of return in Salah. I look at her picture. I'm holding it still. I printed her picture to make her feel real. Her name was Reunion. She could never get in to that city of hers to which she'd never been. And the next poem goes out with apologies to Lidl Supermarket and no apologies at all to Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng or any other Tory bastard. This is Where Will It All End? Where will it all end? It will all end, and this is not a riddle, it will all end in the middle aisle at Lidl. Skip past the food and do a U-turn. That withstood, you will discern this isn't greed, but could make your eyes bleed. Crayons, candles, creed, all things the poor need, I need. Those Liz Truss tins for growing pies. Buy 2, get a free tool for sharpening lies. And look, a book. I'm not judgmental, but How to Feed a Family on a Budget. Fluorescent think tanks, oil drum wood and thermal blanket sets. This isn't greed. Those socks so thick, your children won't need shoes, complete with stick for scraping off the shit. There's plenty of it. Fat fires, mowers, hard-faced hammers. Oh, look how sweet. Pink unicorns with silver horns. Their rainbows were removed and no one noticed. Sports bras, garden chairs, inhalers, insulation by the sheet. And look, Christmas is coming. It always is. So get the new nativity for the precariat. Shepherds bring slaughtered lambs. The other beasts are thinly sliced and value-packed. No Joseph, he's on remand. But if you shake the kings, they laugh. Stable for rent. Mary and Jesus froze to death. Out on the pavement, they demonstrate. The very concept of a median's extinct. Back in the shop, it's all on credit. A universal deficit at every till point. There should be music playing on a loop. There should be music playing on a loop. There should be music playing on a loop, a catchy song that's bound to get to number one, a band of fucking angels singing. When it's gone, it's gone. I see nice little nods and things. That's good. That's good. Nice bit of nodding. The next poem is written in the form of a ghazal. It's a poetry form that goes back to ancient Arabic poetry. And this is called Ghazal Rising. Ring in the days when all that understood rise up. The noise imbalance made from earth and wood rise up. Bestowed to us by ancient minds, a chain of names unbroken that we could rise up. Enough of nostrums that deny the promise to each child we would make good rise up. To tessellate the shapes of life, align in ways that nature's prospects should rise up. Survive a scientific text, predicting temperatures to make our blood rise up. Before all brilliance goes to waste, let knowledge burnt as tallow in the mud rise up. Each life at stake must plead the case for sending out the dove before the floods rise up. I remember very clearly the day of the Grenfell fire. I was working in Sloane Square, and from the roof of where I worked, I could see very clearly that tower going up in a pillar of smoke, and I will never forget that. This poem is called What Price? Gold does not burn easily. It resides cool and calm in the empty rooms of Kensington, which oligarchs, old money and fading pop stars pass through when tiring of their first and second homes, where those that can will vote to price the disaffected northward, where poverty has its place, or towards the coast, past the holiday homes, to caravans, caves, and the sea beyond. The poor cannot stay in their cramped rooms, silent behind the cladding to reduce offence. With the community centre and the youth club gone, where else but the streets, where they cannot be trusted because they could be violent, because they are too many we are, smoked out of the capital's rebirth with the heavy air whispering murder. This city must hear itself above its consumption. For those who have thrown their children blindly into the waiting arms of hope and turned to melt within their wedding rings. I'm going to do one more, and I'm afraid it's no more cheerful than the others. But this poem is called Barrel Bomb, Syria, 2015. And I think that the thing about continuing wars and acts of oppression is every time a new one comes along, existing ones get pushed out of the spotlight. I hate the phrase donor fatigue, but it's used quite a lot, and I think that applies to Syria. In a city where sirens hush the night creatures, every morning is eaten off a knife. A widow comes to breakfast on blood and masonry, plucking my debris from the earth. The furrows of her palms are ignorant of their cargo, as are the soles of her feet. I am the penitent beggar at the heel of her broken shoe. Sister, I cry, cast me skyward, stop this mortiferous rain. Reverse my unguided fall, refill me with oil. remove my bearings from the shredded limbs, return them to industry. Take me back to scrap and pig iron. Have the furnace recast me as a bedpan or skull, bring the nails from the hospital, the ones that took the eye, the nose, the tongue. Reinvent them as a trundle cot or crutches. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sue. And a round of applause for Sue.
Well done, great. Woohoo! Love it.
So we're going to come to the third of our poets this evening, P.R. Murry, who's been a long-term friend of mine, whom I first got to know in Green Left. And he's always had a sort of greenish tinge to his poetry. So welcome, Pete, and over to you.
Okay, thank you, Joseph. My first poem, I'd like to dedicate it to a gentleman by the name of Mike Cooley and to all the other of his comrades who were involved in an event which is now known as the Lucas Plan. Factories in Wilton and Birmingham, not where you go unless you got paid to build parts for bombers and tanks, for this is where these were made, and those who made those weapons knew what the things they made could do to men and women like them. But then again, you must sell what you can sell to pay for food and a roof as well. The system that sets a worker's price isn't ever kind or nice, and in the case of Lucas Aerospace, compassion had no place in such calculations. So redundancies were the fix applied in 1976 to workers' unions would not comply. We can still work, they said, and asked why. We could not now make machines not intended to kill and burn. We could design blades that turn with the wind to make clean power, devise car engines that make fewer fumes. We could be building kidney machines, saving lives, not taking. And none of this was just wild dreams, because they built the prototypes of socially useful technology. Management refused to see, and only words and sympathy came from Labour and the TUC. So it all amounted to a might have been, but one that some still remember to remind us what we could have seen instead of planetary destruction driven by greed, a world where workers control their work and produce for human needs. And
Brilliant.
I'm glad that Sue mentioned socks in one of her poems, because this will illustrate how important these items are to an analysis of capitalism. Sock, 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 emergency. There are no socks upon my feet. There are no socks that I can see. Socks, 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 immediately. Woke up in the morning, birds are singing in the tree, but I see toes in front of me. So I seek socks with urgency. Sock, 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 emergency. There are no socks upon my feet. There are no socks that I can see. Socks, 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 immediately. My socks are vermin dirty and my socks are soaking wet, but I've got to wear them or go barefoot. I've got a marked absence of hosiery. It's a sock, sock, sock emergency. There are no socks upon my feet. There are no socks that I can see. Socks, 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 immediately. But am I going to sit here till my feet grow fur? No, I'm going to get up, get going, be a sock entrepreneur. Sock, sock, sock emergency. There are no socks upon my feet. There are no socks that I'm going to see. So I'm going to start a sock factory. I'm going to raise some capital, going to go it alone, get the proletarians knitting in a free trade zone. Sock, sock, sock emergency. There are no socks upon my feet. There are no socks that I can see. Make more socks immediately. Now I've started moving. I ain't going to stop like a shark in the water. I'll keep swimming or I drop. I won't let anyone else make any socks. It's a sock, sock, sock emergency. You've all got to buy your socks from me. I've wiped out all competition. So now you see I've got a sock, sock, sock monopoly. Okay. And that kind of illustrates that capitalism. Well, no, it doesn't illustrate it, but capitalism isn't just about exploitation. It's also about control. Control starts in the home and then extends, in some cases, to the garden. If you have the money, why not spend it creating your very own miniature totalitarian state in your very own garden? Surround and secure your territory with hedges, trimmed into regular, rectangular configurations. Install wrought iron gates to control all migration. Only allow grass to grow in designated lawns and nowhere else. Ensure each blade of grass is exactly cut to a uniform length and that everyone is of the same species and colour. AstroTurf is not an acceptable substitute because it would not involve making living things submit to your will. Arrange other selected purebred plants at precisely equal intervals in borders that are made in accurate geometrical shapes. Only squares, parallelograms and triangles will do. Use fire, iron, chemical and biological means to eradicate all intrusive weeds, insects, invertebrates and other creatures. Install automatic security lights and videos to enhance surveillance. The sky may be unruly, weather unpredictable, but just ignore them and gloat over your new horticultural order. But things may go wrong, even in such a garden as that. Wildness may intrude. And this poem describes how that happens. If you get up early in summer, you may see me lazing, sunbathing in the first rays of the day, lying yawning, content, alone on the lawn that you thought you rented or even owned. You probably thought it was part of your home, but it's not. It's mine. And I've been living here all the time, making my bed under your garden shed. This whole street of discreet little English persons' castles, clenched tight by suburban arseholes, is not your land. It's mine. I hunt across it in my own time, and you seldom see me unless I want you to, and I show myself so you can know clearly who is the true owner of the territory. The urbane, suburban, fox. My compliments, that's me. Okay, and lastly, another animal and another poem about control, bureaucracy, and one or two other things, I suppose. Lilith leapt the electric fence. Maybe at the time it made sense to pounce, claws extended at a bird in flight and so fall into freedom by accident, or maybe she made a deliberate jailbreak because you've got to do what you've got to do to get out of the zoo, and who knows what a lynx thinks. Briefly, Lilith, the lynx, got away. She was no longer on display. She was no longer confined to be admired or to be ignored by the curious, the awestruck or the bored peering through the wire. Perhaps real freedom then kicked in, with no food and drink provided, out in the woods and the fields and hills. To eat she has to hunt and kill, and maybe at first she has an edge, since it must be centuries since any lynx walked and stalked along these thickets and hedges. So maybe some rabbits or mice or a bird or two turned just too late and drew their last breath between the jaws of golden-eyed death. Sadly, hunters can be hunted too, and Lilith could not be left to be free. She was the property of a zoo, and large predators in Britain just cannot be unless they're members of the bourgeoisie. Uncaught, Lilith caused official fear, alleged pose a risk severe, so a killing bullet, not a tranquilizing dart, was sent to stop this beauty's heart. But the wheel will turn, justice will be done, and free once more Lilith will run, adding along on larger paws, with longer, stronger, deadlier claws, reborn, larger, fiercer cat. She'll rip the throat out of bureaucrats. And I must apologise to any members of PCS for the last line.
Thank you very much, Pete, and a round of applause for P.O. Murray.
Brilliant.
Hooray!
Okay, Patrick. So I just wanted to ask you a couple of questions. I mean, I was listening to a program last week actually about poetry, and somebody had a quote. I can't remember who said it originally, but that poetry was the antidote to the journalistic present, which I think is quite an interesting concept. It has a wider perspective, I think. And I was going to ask you a little bit about the history of Dodo Poets. I mean, I know you started up the Ragged Trousered Cabaret group, which is clearly, the name was influenced by Robert Tressel's famous novel, Ragged Trousered Philanthropist. But Dodo has always struck me as having, quite a sort of political core, if you like. You think that is the case, and what's the sort of, do you think there are many other groups like that, or do you think you're fairly unique in that respect?
I don't know whether we're unique. There was also, of course, and still is, Apples and Snakes, who started in the early 80s and were quite, Pete was actually, I think, part of the committee that set up Apples and Snakes, so there is a connection there. And they have been putting on, quite challenging and, great poetry ever since about 1982, I think, if I'm correct. But Dodo does come from a political lineage in that we were running, Pete and I and another group of trade unionists and members of the movement were running Ragged Trouser Cabaret from 1984. And we set up Dodo in 1989, so we'd have an outlet really to put on just purely poetry, because largely poetry, that is, because Ragged Trouser Cabaret drew its performers from, musicians, comedians, artists of that sort, and actors. So we wanted a more focused group to focus on poetry. And Ragged Trouser Cabaret does occasional shows still, but we more or less wound that up as a going entity and focused on Dodo Modern Poets from 1989, really. But Ragged Trouser Cabaret, of course, had been most active during the worst years of Thatcher's assault on the union movement, when its programme of benefits for the labour movement and workers everywhere was, of course, at its most needed, really.
Yeah, and there was a discussion on the news this evening about the usual question, are we back to the winter of discontent again? But they were comparing the level of strikes with the 1970s. There's still no comparison between the strikes now and, the huge numbers of days lost in strikes at that time.
Well, of course, Margaret Thatcher set out to, destroy the most powerful union, starting with the miners, working onto the print workers. She, took on the seafarers and the NHS unions as well. So she had a real hatred for unions. That was obvious from the time she became Prime Minister and started calling unions the enemy within. And we knew we were happy to be the enemy of her anyway.
I know this is a question that poets often hate being asked, but are there sort of any main themes to your poetry, or do you sort of draw inspiration from anything, really?
Well, I draw inspiration from all sorts of sources, but generally my approach is to carry a small notebook around, and at any point of the day, something will pop into my mind. I'll see something on the news, I'll read something, some memory will pop up, so that I just write down a line or two, and later on work that into a poem, which will be either, about that subject or something related to it. But clearly we're all, interested in the politics of the day and what's happening socially, as well as what's happening, in personal lives of people.
So I've been to a number of the Dodo readings. They were originally in the Poetry Cafe in Soho, but then they switched to the King and Queen pub in Fitzrovia. But since the pandemic, they've been online, and there's been quite a large number of contributions, haven't there? Do you want to say anything about that?
This was really Pete's brainchild. Obviously, when the pandemic came along, we weren't able to continue performing. And, Pete came up with the idea that we should do something online. So we tried it out. And we're now on number 10, I think. And Pete's doing a brilliant job of editing the videos and the contributions that they come into, a show that people can watch at their own convenience. Individually, we are getting back to doing live performances, and hopefully we'll be able to put on some live Dodo performances before too long. But it really has been a nice way to not only keep the Dodo Modern Poets going, but draw contributions from further afield. We've had poets from Malta, Japan, performer coming in from India. So it's become a more, I wouldn't say global is exactly the right word, but we've been able to stretch our tentacles further. I noticed Stuart Larner is here tonight, who's based in the north of England, and Stuart has performed with us at the Poetry Cafe in London, but of course more recently he's been able to perform more easily by just contributing to our online shows, and we love his contribution. So that's been a real development. I should also add, Sue has been involved with Dodo really right from the beginning. We met Sue in Cornwall in 1986, I think, and we brought up a show of Cornish poets and performers, including Sue, to perform in London under the heading Cornwall Rising. So it was actually to highlight the real unemployment problems that happened in Cornwall around that time, and are still happening, of course. But at the time, it did a tour of labour clubs, and from then on, Sue has been, part of Dodo Modern Poets, and we've performed all over the country and taken shows to Ireland along with Pete. So it's it's the three of us really have been the three chief Dodos in a way for however many years have passed since 1989, which is 33, is it? I think
we've all been around the block, is what he's trying to say.
I was just going to ask. I was just going to ask Sue a couple of questions, but Pete, was there something that you wanted to?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention a gentleman called Max Fishel, who's present tonight, and he's done. He's a very good poet, and he's done a great performance for Dodo. And I just also like to say that for the virtual Dodo, there's Max. Wave at the audience. Maybe he'll come and do one of these for you one day. I hope so, because he's well worth listening to. And so Stuart Larner as well. I don't want to leave him out. But I just wanted to say that if anybody else is writing poetry, or you can either put in poems for Dodo as text, or you can make a little video of yourself, or some people even make videos of things like trees and the sea and tops and other poetic items to go with their contributions to Dodo. So we usually have 2 featured poets, and then as many as want to come with text and video poems. So if you're interested, contact Patric, and we should be running another virtual Dodo. I don't know when, probably sometime like April, I expect.
I was just going to say that I contributed to.
Oh, so of course I mustn't forget Joseph.
Forget him,
our host. Can I let me grovel to you?
The last poem I sent in was actually inspired by a visit to Folkestone, where Patric is now residing, and it actually sitting on the harbour inspired me to write a poem about Brexit, because it was one of those days when you couldn't see the French coast because it was too hazy, and it sort of reminded me of the whole Brexit phenomenon. But anyway, that Anti-Capitalist Resistance have published that poem, actually complete with a picture of the restored ex-railway station in Folkestone on our website.
It's a very, very good poem, Joseph. I just add to what you saying there that I think you mentioned refugees in that poem as well, and should say that we did have a vigil for the 32 people who died trying to cross the channel on the beach here about a week ago. And one of our organisations here is called Kent Refugee Action Network, which organised that together with the Labour Party, the Lib Dems, the Greens and others. So there's quite an active movement down here to enable refugees to be welcomed, or asylum seekers. And this echoes what happened in the years around the First World War, when Belgian refugees were welcomed to Folkestone. There is a painting hanging in our town museum that shows that event in all its detail. So that's something that Folkestone is proud of, really.
That's interesting. Sue, just to come to you now, I know you're very, very proud of your Cornish roots, and Cornwall and the sea and so on feature in a number of your poems. I happened to see a series of videos that you made a few years back called Shop Girl, I think. A wonderful performance piece about your days working in, was it John Lewis?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, it was really inspirational, very, very, very good. And I was hoping that you're going to make some similar type pieces, videos in the future. But I mean, do you want to say anything about Cornwall and the role of Cornwall in your poetry?
Well, I'll just say something about those performance pieces that I used to do, very theatrical pieces in character and costume. And I've still got all the outfits. But I don't think I can get into any of them. So there might be a bit of, dressmaking assistance needed if I was going to bring them back out on the road. But I did kind of move a little bit away from the very performancey stuff and started to be a bit more sort of structured about the poetry I'm writing. But you never know. If I can still get into the little PVC miniskirt that I wore in Shop Girl, then I might give it a go.
I thought they were wonderful.
Anyway, if anyone wants to see what he's talking about, those videos are on my website. But they will go back a very long way. So that was about what Shop Girl was about. My 34 years, I'm retired now, of working for John Lewis in Peter Jones, and it was from the roof of Peter Jones on the day of the Grenville fire that I watched, that block burning in the well, not even that much in the distance. So it's an image that really sticks in my mind. Cornwall. I don't live in Cornwall, but a lot of people think I do because I say so much about it and I write a lot of poetry about it. Patric was saying about the show, the tour that we brought up back in the 80s, Cornwall Rising, which was to highlight a lot of the problems that are in Cornwall. One of the main problems in Cornwall at the moment, and there are a lot of problems in Cornwall, is housing. Homelessness in Cornwall is just horrific. It's absolutely horrific. And historically, it's been second homes that have caused a lot of those problems. But now it's even worse because a lot of the people who are letting normal, let properties to local people, longer lets, etc., they've all started doing Airbnbs instead. They've all turned into Airbnbs, and there is virtually no rented housing stock at all. Just for example, a friend of mine who's very involved in this in Cornwall gave me some stats. I'm not quite sure where she got the stats from, but quite recent stats from Penzance, which is the sort of one of the closest towns to where I come from. That at a given day that she checked into it, in Penzance, there were, not a very big town, there were 80 available Airbnbs, and there were 8 rented properties for a normal person to rent who wasn't on holiday. So I just think that sort of highlights the problem down there, and it's terrible. And I do write about that as well, as I think you know.
Yeah, thank you, Sue. And coming to Pete and I have known each other since our mutual days in the Green Party, and Pete and I were founders of Green Left. You've always had a very strong environmental message in your poems. Pete, do you want to say something about that?
I suppose, yes, I have. I don't know why. It's just one of my central concerns. I think I sometimes do what people have done throughout history, which is project thoughts and images, using animals as imagery for various kinds of political and other concerns, and that's always interesting to me. And the other thing I'm interested in using as imagery is menswear, as you may have gathered from.
I have noticed, yes.
Yeah.
And you have a wonderful sense of dry humour in your poetry, I have to say.
Well, I'm trying to make it wet.
I know as well that, Pete, that you're a sculptor and an artist, and I've seen some of your work on display in some exhibitions and so on. Do you find any influence of one form on the other? I mean, do you write poetry about any other sculpture or art, or vice versa?
No, on the whole, I tend to keep them separate. I've done one or two things you might call poster poems, where I've taken a poem and illustrated it. And when I attempt to produce books, which I'm about to try and do again, half pleasure in doing that for me is finding or drawing the right illustrations for the book. But a lot of my art is, I can't remember who said this. It was either Frank Zappa or Elvis Costello or some other smart ass like that. And they said, writing about music is like dancing about architecture. In other words, that means that you can't directly translate one form of art to another, but they kind of overlap. I mean, I'm starting to talk complete piffle, so I'll shut up.
I get you. I know what you mean.
Okay, thanks, Pete. So we're going to go over to the audience. So if you can try and raise your little yellow electronic hand if you've got any questions to our poets. I'm trying to see if there are any hands up. Yes, Stuart.
Yeah, I was just wondering, how would each of you look back over your work and decide which would be your best poem that you've ever done? How would you judge it? Very often people say, oh, it's the one I've just finished, the one that's fullest in my mind. But are there other poems that you've written which stand out in your memory more?
Well, I'm like to think I'm reading a couple of the poems that I regard as amongst my best tonight. One is When You Hang a Poet, because I think it's a universal sentiment. And I'm going to be finishing with a poem about William Morris, which I think is, I really like the poem because I think it covers in the space of a 10-verse poem what you might read quite a long biography to get hold of. And it was based, the information does come from, I think it's Fiona McCarthy's biography of William Morris. And I lived, so I'll be saying later I introduced this poem in the part of London where William Morris started his manufacturing. But there are so many, Stuart, that I like.
Do Sue and Pete, do you want to answer that question as well?
Yeah, oh, that's really hard. Yeah, I mean, but yeah, your best poetry. I mean, yeah, I mean, if I look back at the poems I was writing in the 80s when I was described myself as a punk poet, and any sort of, poetry expert, which, I'm kind of supposed to be now, and I've been studying it for so long, looked at those. I mean, on the page, they look very sort of basic and very sort of scruffy, but performed, and in their time they were absolutely did what they said on the tin. So things do change, really. I think I don't know what I wouldn't even like to say what my favourite poems of my own are, but I think anything that can just raise emotions in the listener or the reader. If I can do a poem that gives somebody goosebumps and really makes them have some strong emotional feeling, then I think that's a good poem.
Yeah. Pete, what about you?
Well, I think poems are like items of clothing, menswear in particular, and
Masochistic poetry.
what you need to do is put them in the washing machine and turn them round and round and round, and then take them out again and see what it is. And maybe you find like an old shirt that you haven't worn for years, and you think, I could, that's all right, I could still do that. And I mean, I think Stuart's right. You tend to think the last thing you wrote is the most brilliant thing ever, but I also find amongst my metaphorical mixture of old clothes and things I've written years ago that I quite like, and I also find things that a week after I've written them, I think, why on earth did you ever do that? But I don't think I can judge my own work, frankly.
Ian, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I was just, you probably said this, I may have missed it, but do you have regular reading sessions? And also, do you publish any of your poetry under the Dodo imprint, or do you do either of those two things? And finally, if it's a triple question, what are your favourite poets? What other poets have actually inspired you? That's a lot. Sorry about that.
Patrick, do you want to answer the question about the readings and the publishing?
Well, at the moment, as I said earlier, we're not doing live readings as Dodo Modern Poets at the moment. We're individually doing bits and pieces here and there. Sue and I did a show in the Canterbury Festival in October. So our main outlet as a group at the moment is the video shows that, as Pete said earlier, everybody's welcome to send in either a video or a text poem and contact us about that. As for my favourite poets, there are so many. Of course, I'm very fond of poets, Irish poets like Yeats, Seamus Heaney. Sylvia Plath is a poet I return to all the time. The beat poets, Ginsberg and so on, are amongst my favourites. There's a great new collection by a poet called Helen Mort, who has often performed at Dodo in the past and is now being published by Chatto and Windus. So those are amongst my favourite poets, I would say. I think there was another question. I can't remember what it was.
It's about publishing. Yeah, if Dodo publish.
No, we haven't published or have no plans at the moment to publish an anthology.
Sue, do you have any?
I can't answer the question about favourite poets. It's absolutely impossible. And I read a ridiculous amount of poetry, just a stupid amount of poetry, really. It's probably bad for my health. And so, I'm discovering new poets all the time. And so, yeah, it's impossible. And what I just have to say, though, there is so much wonderful poetry out there at the moment, really incredible. I think the poetry scene, on all sorts of levels is as strong as it's ever been. It's brilliant. I'm really glad to see that.
I would agree with you, Sue, because before the pandemic, I went to some of the open mic days at the Poetry Cafe at Soho, and it would just be 25 people there reading poems, some of whom had never read a poem in public before, but I was often, blown away by the standard of some of the poems. I think And it's very good that people have an outlet to read their poetry like that. That's very important.
And there's some fantastic poetry magazines out there and small publishers such as Dempsey and Windle, Palewell Press, doing fantastic work to get those poems, out and published. So one of my current favourite poets is a poet called John McCulloch, who he's a fantastic poet who lives in Hove, and he said, if you're interested in poetry and you want to write good poetry, you should read like you're a hunter. Read as many different poems as you can, and I just think that's a cracking suggestion. And as broad an array of poets as you can lay your hands on.
Oh yeah, so Pete has just put the blogspot for the videos. Yeah,
It's got all the 10 virtual Dodo videos where we've got 2 featured poets, and then in some cases up to about 30 other poets doing 1 poem each, either text or video.
Rowan, you have your hand up.
Sorry, I thought I unmuted there, but I didn't. Thank you, and thank you for the wonderful reading. Sometimes it can feel like the left, or at least certain contingents of the left, have a kind of Philistine streak to them when it comes to poetry and art in general. So it's wonderful to hear poetry with a sort of left-wing edge to it and left-wing ideas. And I was wondering, just sort of for any general reflections on the role of poetry in terms of left-wing movements and left-wing struggles, and whether you think there needs to be more of it, and if it needs to be more central within the left and its consciousness. And I'm really looking forward to a poem on William Morris. He's a personal favourite of mine.
Shall I say something?
Yeah, well, I mean, I was thinking, say something about Ragged Trouser Cabaret, etc., etc. Yeah.
Well, we've always seen poetry and art as something that can help the labour movement, and we've always seen poetry as an integral part of that. I suppose one of the examples I can give you is that during the 1980s, we took shows down to the Snowdown Colliery in Kent. And apart from taking performers and poets down from London, we discovered there was a young poet called Ellie Bence living in the colliery village who was writing poetry. So we put her on stage. And it was one of the most moving moments in poetry I've ever seen, because she was writing about how the people were living under the pressure of that period, and writing about her family, her parents and her friends, and the desperate future they were facing. And while she was reading, you could hear a pin drop in that room, and there were people crying. It was a very moving moment. I think poetry has the power to do that, to focus our feelings on what the struggle is, what it means, and what the real losses are if we don't win. And of course that was the purpose of Ragged Trouser Cabaret in part, but also to raise funds and money for the labour movement, because obviously we encouraged as many people as we could to perform benefits for causes like that. We put shows on picket lines. We used to take a regular show to the South Africa House 24-hour picket line. We took part in something called Pit Dragon, which was an all-day-long show outside Neasden Power Station to stop the coking trucks getting in, and that comprised poets, musicians, and many other performers, comedians, of course, of the day. So yes, I think, I always think it's important that poets, if they can, don't write only about their personal experiences and lives, valuable as that is, but try and look outward and say something to the world. Anna Akhmatova, the Russian poet, is still remembered today for standing up to Stalin, of course, with her fantastic poetry. And in one of her poems, she's asked by somebody standing next to her outside a prison, "Can you describe this?" And of course she does.
I think, Sue, you wanted to come in on that.
No, I wasn't going to, but I think poetry, it's incredibly important. And, Patric's been telling us about, about all the things that Raggatos Cabaret and Dodo have been doing over the years, affiliated to the labour movement. And there's some great, there's an organisation called Poets on the Picket Line. I'm not actually a member of that, but they do a very similar thing, and they're still very active. And there's this great poetry appears in things like the Morning Star and the New Statesman and the New European. So they're all good places to seek out left field poetry. I'm a member of an organisation called Poets for the Planet, and I think I did put the link on there. And they were essentially sort of put together for poets and artists to raise awareness about climate change and environmental issues, and they act as quite a big umbrella organisation. All the members sort of exchange ideas and workshops and publications, and I'd strongly recommend having a look at their website or their Facebook. And quite recently, in 2020, we did a fundraiser for 2 environmental charities, Earthwatch and Bees for Development, and I'm not sure how much we raised, but in excess of £10,000. And earlier this year, we did a Poets of the Planet did Poets for Ukraine, did a similar event and raised £30,000 in one day.
Wow.
And so that's the power of poetry. I'm very proud to be part of anything that can achieve something like that.
Thanks, Sue. Terry.
Yeah, a couple of things, and first of all, thank you very much for the readings. Very powerful stuff. One of the things that struck me was how much international reflection there was in many of your poems, and I was thinking about the comparative place of poetry in left culture in this country and internationally. It's always seemed to me, as somebody who had the misfortune to grow up on this island, although of Irish descent, that the British left is much less integrated into culture as part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. And I wondered what your reflections were on that. And then secondly, while I agree with Joseph that the level of industrial struggle that we're seeing at the minute isn't anything like the days of the winter of discontent, never mind Thatcher, it does seem to me we are seeing a resurgence of quite a lot of militant action in the workplace. And I wonder to what extent, Sue was talking about Poets on the Picket Line, and I have seen a couple of performances on pickets in the last few months, but they've kind of felt like many of the younger people haven't kind of quite known how to respond. And I kind of wonder what we can collectively do to try and integrate that need for benefits and time to socialise, because, part of the struggle is actually having a good time together and having time to reflect and how we can think about integrating more of those things. So bring back something like the Ragged Trouser Cabaret. Thanks.
One of the things we did in Ragged Trouser Cabaret, we had a policy that we would, if you like, sell our services to people like Labour Party social functions, trade union social functions. They would pay us, a lump sum of maybe £300, and we provide some top class entertainment for the whole evening. And we used to say to the acts that perform with us, we will provide you with a paying gig if you'll later on do a benefit for us, which is not going to be paid, maybe minimum expenses. And so it was very much that sort of thing where you approach people, ask them to help, and found out who was sympathetic. And there's an awful lot of performers out there, obviously, including us, who will, give our services to benefits, because we do want to. Obviously, we've all come from the labour movement. We've all earned our stripes as union activists and all the rest of it. And we do want to see the labour movement prosper, and we do want to see a change of government, and we do want to support people who are in dispute, which is one of the main things that Ragged Trouser Cabaret did. And, we still want to, do those things. And there are many performers, I'm sure, who would be happy to, come along and help out at a social function that was organised in a pub, for example.
Pete, did you want to come in on this?
I just wanted to say I've got some sympathy with what Terry was saying, but I mean, there is a tradition of radical political poetry in English in England, going back to people like Shelley and so on. It's stronger in Ireland, but it's there. But I mean, I'm quite optimistic about what's going to happen in poetry, because I don't know. I just prior to this, I just saw Nigel Farage having a fit because allegedly, the demographics of the British population are changing. We're bringing in people from cultures where poetry of various forms, going back to things like rap music, the poetry of the Middle East and Pakistan and places like that, is much more integrated, or appears to be from the outside. And I think potentially, as has already happened, but it could happen more, that we get a cross-fertilization of cultures, and we do begin to develop political poetry much more in this country. I wish I'd be around long enough to see it happen.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good point about, as our country, our population has become more diverse. Therefore, the writers in the country become more diverse, and you get more access to their writing. I mean, obviously, there's nothing to stop you obviously reading poets from other countries, but you're more likely to, if they're published in the UK and they're performing in the UK and they're getting the recognition in the UK. So that can only be a good thing.
Okay, I don't see any other hands up, so I think we're going to get a final poem from each of the poets, and I'm going to take it in reverse order this time. So I'll start with P.O. Murry.
Okay, this is a poem about animals again, and the way in which some animals are more popular than others, and the injustice of that. Hello, I'm a slug, and I'm crawling out tonight, leaving a trail of slime because I'm going to unite with the headlouse, the woodlouse, the weevil, and the rat, and also join up with several other species that are anti-charismatic in the public eye. But this is an injustice which we seek to rectify. None of us look striking, posing on mountain sides, migrating across savannas, or singing in the sky. We don't dive or leap majestically out of the ocean. Fine artists don't paint us to symbolize emotions or patriotism, freedom, and other noble notions. We don't roam in rainforests or on tundras. We were stowaways on the ark. Where we live is called infested, never made a national park. No one will cross the world to see us. To hear a gorilla fart, they'll fly all the way to Africa in a polluting jet plane. Gorilla farts, they gasp in glee and then fly back again. We won't sell you anything with cute faces or appealing eyes. The means of our own deaths are what we advertise. One picture of a cockroach sells tons of insecticides. We are vermin, pariahs, carrion eating parasites. But when it all ends, we'll cut you down to size, because the corpse of one lion will feed 10,000 flies.
Thank you, Pete. Sue.
Yeah. I'm on muted. Yeah, I'm on muted. I think I don't know how much you can see because I'm in a small screen at the moment, but I've actually got a T-shirt back up, partially back up the poem. I don't know if you can see. Anyway, I've got a lovely Paddington T-shirt on, which says "Migration is not a crime," and this poem features Paddington, but not about migration directly, but it's about the. It was written during the height of the Windrush scandal. And excuse the long title. This is Paddington and his best friend discuss colonialism over a cup of tea at the Notting Hill Community Centre. And it's written in the form of a pantoum. All the marmalade in the world won't fix this, says my dear friend Windrush, who looks tired these days. He's a bear. He's been told that he could be deported, not a storybook icon with a British passport. My old friend Windrush looks so tired these days. He's worked 40 years as a hospital porter. He has a CBE, but no British passport, not seen as important because he's a bear. He's worked 40 years as a hospital porter and remembers the riots when I arrived in the 50s. We always felt different because we were bears, and it surprises some people to hear us cry out. We remember the riots when I arrived in the 50s, me and the bear that could be deported. And it surprises some people to hear us cry out. All the marmalade in the world won't fix this.
Thank you, Sue. And finally, moving on to Patrick and the William Morris poem.
Yes, I used to live in the London Borough of Merton, where Sue still lives, and we often performed shows, and still do from time to time, at the Colour House Theatre in Merton Abbey Mills. And the Colour House Theatre is right next door to the site of William Morris's first factory, just there on the River Wandle. So this is called Our Neighbour Bill. Here where we are tonight, William Morris set the world alight, producing textiles for discerning homes, some whose furniture included thrones. The Queen hung his paper in Balmoral, rankling with the great man's morals. All the time his socialist heart insisted workers should share his art. He believed that wealth caused sin and set to write the story out, how capital would take a route. In News from Nowhere, Dream of John Ball, he showed how power would take a fall. By the Wandle, he created jobs for human beings, not cogs. Kelmscott Manor, the Red House, designed to show beauty and utility together go. Marxist realist, friend of Engels, medieval dreamer, political schemer, skillful weaver of art and verse, our neighbour Bill was all these things, sharing life with passionate friends. Rossetti, Janey, and Burne-Jones, so much talent in these few homes. How many lives did William lead? Enough to write 2 epic poems, The Earthly Paradise, The Golden Loom, and splendid versions of Nordic tales set dancing to a mighty tune. He formed the Art Workers Guild, the Socialist League, permitting art to live, ideas to breathe. Rich was the work, but time was thin. No man of flesh fits so much in. Dead at 58. A physician said he died of being William Morris, I think, not pleurisy, gout, or too much drink. There goes a man who never stopped till time's winged chariot called a halt. On Wandle's banks he laid his schemes. Tonight we honour William's dreams. The river rolling through his life belongs to you, as he hoped and knew. That liberty should make us proud. Let's say it here, let's say it loud, and raise a glass to William Morris, a roaring lion with a poet's kiss.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that powerful poem.
Last line of that poem, it's fantastic. Fantastic.
I would like to everyone to give it up for the Dodo Modern Poets, who've given us a brilliant performance here tonight.
I'd like to
Just
thank
before we
Joseph.
finish, I think Terry Conway is going to say a few words about our conference, which is this weekend.
Yeah, sure. I put the link in the chat. So Anti-Capitalist Resistance is organising a 2-day event on Saturday and Sunday for people who want to attend in person. It's at Birkbeck College in central London, but it's also available online. We've got 6 amazing sessions on the fight back, on China, a session on why can't we have nice things, so about kind of aesthetics and film and stuff, women in the international fight for bodily autonomy, session on economics, and finishing with a session on why we need eco-socialism. It would be great if anybody wanted to join us for any or all of that, either in person or online. As I say, I put the link in the chat, and the sessions will also be recorded. So we'll be sharing the videos and podcasts of the speakers afterwards. Next time we should get some of you to come and perform.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Well, thank you again, Pete and Sue and Patrick, for a wonderful evening. And as Terry said, we'll have to get you back again. Somebody who has just left the meeting's trying to get back in again. So again, thank you, and thanks for coming, everybody. And stay
Everyone,
well.
thanks for having us. Thank you.
Amazing night.
Joseph.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you for inviting us, and thanks
You're
for
more than
listening,
welcome.
everyone.
And the events of the week, are they on Zoom? Can we just sign up, like, sort of fairly like,
Yeah, they're on Zoom.
Okay, cool.
So-
I'll try and I will really try and get to some of those. Thank you.
That'd be great.
That would be amazing.
It'll be on Zoom, but yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye,
Good night.
everyone.
Good
Oh,
night.
this was Joseph. Wonderful. Thanks again, Joseph. Thanks, everybody. Oh.